Hollywood once crowned a blonde who made headlines faster than she made movies. Jayne Mansfield turned bikinis into breaking news, Vegas stages into gold mines, and one shocking photo into a 12-state ban. How did a single crash freeze that momentum, and why does her playbook still run the show today? Born to perform, Jayne before Hollywood. Jayne Mansfield didn't come out of nowhere. She came out of Texas, with a plan and a whole lot of ambition. Born as Vera Jane Palmer in 1933, she grew up in a household that changed quickly after her father died when she was just 3. Her mother eventually remarried, and the family moved to Dallas. That's where Jayne started showing signs of being someone different. She wasn't the kind of kid who waited for attention. She found a way to earn it. By the time most kids were focused on cartoons, Jayne was focused on performance. She played the violin, the piano, and the viola. She took ballroom dancing lessons. She studied Spanish and German, not because anyone made her, but because she wanted to be impressive. This wasn't a child who dreamed of being famous without understanding what it took. She was already working on her craft. If something could make her stand out in a room, she wanted to learn it. And more importantly, she wanted to be better at it than anyone else. She idolized Shirley Temple, not for the songs or the curls, but for the presence. Jayne watched how Temple walked into a room and made it hers. That level of control fascinated her. Temple wasn't just cute, she was commanding. Jayne took note. She wasn't just aiming for beauty, she wanted that kind of presence, that kind of magnetism. She didn't want to be adored from a distance. She wanted to be seen, heard, and remembered. At 16, Jayne met Paul Mansfield. It was fast. Too fast by most people's standards. They married that same winter after knowing each other for less than a month. The marriage wasn't a reaction to teen love. It was part of a timeline she was already moving through. Soon after, she had a daughter, but that didn't slow her down. Most girls in her situation would have stayed home. Jayne didn't. She started college. She enrolled at Southern Methodist University and then at the University of Texas. She studied drama seriously and acted in local productions. She had a baby on her hip, scripts in her bag, and no intention of settling. One of her early performances was in Death of a Salesman, and even then she wasn't playing the role for fun. She was observing, taking in how performances worked, how characters were shaped, how emotions were managed on stage. She was still barely out of her teens, but already treating every role like a learning opportunity. She didn't wait for someone to tell her she had talent. She acted like she already did, and that attitude stuck with her. By her early 20s, Jayne was ready to move. She convinced Paul to pack up and go with her to Los Angeles. This wasn't a vacation. It wasn't one of those vague dreams people float around over coffee. She had mapped out what she wanted to do and where she wanted to do it. Jayne wasn't just moving to LA hoping to get discovered. She was going there to make herself impossible to ignore. At first, she took whatever she could get. She worked odd jobs, including selling candy at a movie theater just to stay close to the energy of film. She went on casting calls and sat through rejections without flinching. But she kept her head down and stayed in the game. She tried modeling. She got cropped out of a General Electric ad because someone thought she looked too sexy for the product. Instead of sulking, she saw it as confirmation. If her look could rattle the room, she was doing something right. She kept studying. She kept showing up. She even started using her married name, Jayne Mansfield, as her professional name. It sounded strong. It sounded memorable. It sounded like a woman who would end up on a billboard. She owned it. During this early stage, what stood out most was how focused she remained. She wasn't distracted by side gigs or discouraged by how slowly things were moving. Her path wasn't built on momentum. It was built on mindset. She had rehearsed this life long before anyone gave her a chance to live it. The difference was, she hadn't made any headlines yet, but that was about to change. The bikini malfunction that made headlines. It was 1954, and the buzz around Jane Russell's film Underwater had drawn a poolside crowd of reporters to a Florida hotel. Russell was the star, but someone else stole the spotlight. Jayne wasn't there to promote a movie. She was there to be seen. Wearing a shiny red lame bikini, she lounged by the pool like she owned the whole premiere. And then, right on cue, the top gave out. Cameras clicked. Reporters gasped. And just like that, a Hollywood nobody became a name the entire country couldn't stop talking about. It didn't matter if the moment was planned or accidental. What mattered was that everyone saw it. Jayne stood still, smiled, and didn't cover up right away. She held the pose long enough to let the flashbulbs burn it into pop culture. By the time the magazines went to print, she was already being described as bold, daring, and different. She hadn't said a single line in a film yet, but her image was doing the work for her. That photo made more impact than most actresses' entire careers. While other aspiring actresses waited for agents to notice them, Jayne forced the conversation. Her so-called malfunction didn't damage her chances. It created them. She made headlines without a role, fan mail without a fan base, and industry buzz before she ever stepped on a studio lot. People started asking, "Who is that?" And that's all she needed. Publicity stunts weren't new, but this one hit differently. America was still getting used to the idea of women who didn't act modest in public. She understood that the camera didn't care about restraint. It cared about spectacle. And she gave it one. This wasn't just about a bathing suit. This was about control. She turned a moment that could have embarrassed someone else into a deliberate career move. And no one could ignore it. The photo spread fast. Editors printed it because they knew readers would stare. Movie scouts circled her name because they knew audiences would show up. Jayne became the woman people whispered about at work and pointed to in grocery store tabloids. Even people who didn't follow the film knew her name, and the ones who did started looking at her differently. Casting agents who had passed on her now asked for meetings. Studio execs who had ignored her photos were now taking phone calls, all from one malfunction. She wasn't the first actress to wear a bikini in public, but she was the first to weaponize it. Instead of playing defense, she used the scandal to move forward. And it wasn't just about being sexy, it was about being unforgettable. That image followed her into every room she walked into afterward. It opened doors, broke rules, and gave her something priceless in show business: leverage. By the time she was doing auditions, her name was already on people's lips. Producers knew the audience was paying attention to her. Reporters were calling her the girl from the pool before they knew what she could do on camera. And Jayne didn't correct them. She leaned into it. She used every interview, every appearance, every article to keep the buzz alive. The bikini stunt wasn't a one-time shock. It was the starting point of a larger plan. She understood that attention wasn't something you waited for. It was something you triggered. That photo became part of her story. It set the tone for everything that followed. She didn't apologize for it. She didn't hide from it. She built on it. It taught her how power works in Hollywood. Not power from directors or critics, but the kind of power that comes from being the story people want to tell, even if they don't fully understand you yet. Studio Blonde with a plan of her own. Soon after the bikini photo incident took over the papers, Warner Brothers officially gave her a contract and started shaping her into their version of a bankable blonde. Her dark hair was bleached, her wardrobe was redesigned, and her on-screen image was sculpted into something that fit their formula. They wanted her to be sexy, playful, and predictable. They didn't ask for range. They asked for presence, and Jayne gave it to them, scene by scene, but always on her terms. The studio thought they were building a character. Jayne understood they were building a brand. She studied how sets operated, how roles were cast, and how promotion worked. She sat through interviews and observed what made a story stick. She listened in on production meetings and learned what made executives nervous. While she read her lines, she also read the room. Everything was information she could use. Every scene was an opportunity to test how far she could stretch her image without breaking the studio's frame around her. She landed parts that were written to highlight her body, not her voice. She was often given scripts with shallow dialogue and flashy costumes. The message was clear. They wanted her to stand there and smile. But Jayne had no interest in staying quiet. In her off-screen moments, she spoke in full sentences. She talked about her education. She made it known that she wasn't just posing. She understood the business and kept reminding people she could take it further than anyone thought. By 1957, she was on magazine covers, in popular films, and gaining serious ground. Fan polls started ranking her above Marilyn Monroe. Her name appeared in articles that didn't always mention Monroe first. Writers started asking if Jayne was rising too fast, and whether audiences were ready to replace one blonde icon with another. She didn't shy away from those comparisons. When asked, she said clearly that she could play serious roles too. She wasn't intimidated by Monroe's fame. She saw her own name in the same lights and worked every day to keep it there. Her confidence wasn't just in interviews, it showed how she navigated studio politics. She knew when to push and when to wait. She said yes to roles that gave her exposure, but she also asked for more control over how she was portrayed. She made her presence felt on set. Directors noticed that she came prepared. Crew members saw that she knew her angles. Other actors realized she wasn't there to coast. She was trying to move upward. Her best-known roles during this period may have leaned into comedy and sex appeal, but behind the scenes, she was pitching ideas. She wanted to stretch into drama. She believed she could handle serious material and didn't hide that ambition. The studios kept her in a certain lane because that's where the money was coming in, but Jayne kept looking for exits. She didn't complain. She calculated. She waited for a moment when she could shift the narrative. She watched how the press followed her. She noticed how headlines were written. She paid attention to which stories stuck and which didn't. If a quote of hers was repeated, she took note. If a photo caused a stir, she learned why. This wasn't a casual interest. It was her way of figuring out how power worked in the system. She saw how quickly studios dropped actresses who didn't play along. She wanted to last longer. That meant being smarter. Jayne also understood how to balance humor with image. When asked about her measurements or her curves, she often gave quick, clever replies. It made her seem approachable. It kept people engaged. But she wasn't joking when it came to her goals. She told interviewers she could take on any type of role. People laughed, but she kept saying it. She repeated it enough that some people finally started to listen. While Warner Brothers marketed her as a fantasy, Jayne kept working on reality. She wasn't waiting for a role to prove she was serious. She was building the proof herself. She memorized her lines, watched her performances, and studied how audiences responded. Every film gave her more insight. Every press tour gave her more practice. She was rehearsing for a bigger role, not one in a movie, but one in the industry itself. This was the period where studios still thought they were managing her. They didn't see how much she was learning from them. They gave her a spotlight, but she was the one adjusting the angles. The queen of self-promotion. In just 9 months, she appeared in over 2,500 newspaper photos. That number still sounds unreal today, even in a world packed with Instagram stories and TikTok reels. She didn't have a PR team working behind the scenes. She was the machine. She knew the power of showing up. It didn't matter if it was a film premiere, a gas station ribbon cutting, or a grocery store opening. If there were flashbulbs, Jayne would be there. And she wouldn't come for free. She started charging appearance fees for almost everything. If someone wanted her to smile and wave, they had to pay. Sometimes she took money. Other times she asked for things she needed, like furniture or food. There were events where she literally walked away with a new sofa just for showing up. She turned her presence into a paycheck. That kind of hustle was unheard of at the time. Jayne didn't wait for Hollywood to decide when she was valuable. She decided it herself. She knew she had something people wanted to look at, so she packaged it, priced it, and sold it. Even her titles became part of the business. She started accepting quirky honors like Miss Fire Prevention or Miss Nylon Sweater. It didn't matter how strange the label sounded. It kept her name in the news, and that's all that mattered. She also built a look that people couldn't miss. Pink became more than a favorite color. It became her brand. Her car was pink. Her clothes were pink. Her mansion on Sunset Boulevard was so drenched in the color that people started calling it the Pink Palace. It wasn't just a gimmick. It made her recognizable from blocks away. If a fan saw a pink convertible roll by, they already knew who was inside. She created a visual identity that followed her into every room, every headline, and every photo. Mansfield turned herself into a one-woman media empire. She didn't need a blockbuster to be talked about. She didn't need a scandal to trend. She had built a system where her face sold magazines, even when her name wasn't on a movie poster. The studios noticed, the public noticed, and reporters definitely noticed. Journalists started writing stories that were based entirely on what she wore or how she posed. It didn't matter what the article said. If Jayne's name was in it, people read it. Even off camera, she played the part. She posed for photos while pumping gas. She smiled during traffic stops. She answered interview questions while holding her baby and wearing a dress no one could ignore. There was no such thing as casual when it came to Jayne. Every outing was planned. Every move was measured. She understood attention better than most people understood acting. And she used it to stay in control. She also knew how to create buzz without relying on controversy. Most of her appearances were fun, colorful, or just strange enough to stay interesting. She posed next to giant tractors, waved from parade floats, and even held live animals during interviews. Everything was staged to create a memorable photo. She didn't wait for accidents. She produced the moment, made it camera-ready, and delivered it straight to the front page. Her level of visibility changed what it meant to be a celebrity. Before her, most stars relied on film roles or magazine profiles to stay relevant. Jayne didn't need either. She became the kind of figure who could walk into a room and generate 5 headlines just by existing. She wasn't acting in those moments. She was performing a version of herself that people couldn't stop watching. Her success also came from consistency. She didn't just go viral once. She stayed viral by turning everything she did into something worth reporting. She became her own news cycle, and for a while it worked better than any studio deal. She didn't need a director to give her a role. She gave herself one, as the star of her own public narrative. The headlines kept coming. So did the invitations. So did the checks. The photo that got her banned in 12 states. But if one photo by the pool could launch Jayne Mansfield's career, another photo almost brought it crashing down. This time, she wasn't lounging in a bikini. She was dressed up, heels on, full glam, walking into a Hollywood party thrown in honor of Sophia Loren. Everyone who was anyone was there, but nobody remembers who else showed up. They only remember what Jayne wore and how Sophia reacted. Jayne walked into the event wearing a dress that pushed every limit. The neckline plunged so deep that even the tablecloths at the venue were offering more coverage. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't accidental. She knew the photographers would be circling, and she made sure they had a clear shot. She leaned forward, laughed loud, posed like it was just another Wednesday. Then she sat down right next to Sophia Loren. The room got quiet. Not because anyone said anything, but because everyone knew the cameras were waiting for that one perfect moment. And they got it. In that exact frame, Sophia Loren stared directly at Jayne's chest. Her expression said everything. Wide-eyed, side-glancing, unsure if she was impressed or horrified. The picture exploded. It didn't just go viral. It became a cultural flashpoint. Newspapers couldn't print it fast enough. Magazine editors debated whether to blur it or frame it. And across the country, some states decided they wanted no part of it. 12 states moved quickly. They banned the photo from publication. They shut down planned appearances where Jayne was scheduled to show up. Some even refused to run film promotions if her name was on the marquee. They said it was indecent. They called it inappropriate. They treated it like a moral emergency. To them, it wasn't just a dress, it was a threat to public decency. But Jayne wasn't sorry. She didn't hold a press conference to explain herself. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She booked more events. She gave more interviews. She took the bands and flipped them into headlines. If a state didn't want her, that made her more newsworthy. If a paper refused to print the photo, that made readers even more curious. She didn't run from the reaction. She used it to stay exactly where she wanted to be, on everyone's mind. The reaction in Hollywood, though, was a little colder. Studio executives had already been on edge with Jayne's growing list of publicity stunts. This one tipped the scale. They had invested in her as a movie star, but they were watching her become something different, something they couldn't manage. The dress wasn't just a problem for the party, it became a problem for the boardroom. The phone calls started slowing down. The scripts stopped coming in. She wasn't officially blacklisted, but the silence spoke for itself. That moment marked a turning point. The same industry that had used her image to sell tickets was suddenly acting like they didn't know her. She wasn't difficult to work with. She wasn't failing at the box office. She was simply doing things on her own terms, and the industry wasn't built for that. The party photo wasn't a scandal by accident, it was a statement. Jayne had pushed things further than the system was ready to handle. Some insiders said it was the last straw. Others said it was exactly what she'd been aiming for, but no one denied that the photo had changed her path. She went from rising star to public spectacle in a matter of weeks. And the people who once called her the next Monroe began stepping away. Even with doors closing, she didn't slow down. She still had fans. She still had power. She still had that unmatched ability to create headlines without saying a word. But the red carpets were getting shorter. The studio meetings were getting fewer. And the phone wasn't ringing with new roles. It was clear the industry had decided to look elsewhere, hoping Jayne's name would fade from the conversation. But she didn't wait to be invited back. She chose a new direction, one that didn't require permission. Vegas headliner Mansfield reinvents the stage. And in the early 1960s, that direction lived in Las Vegas. It was wild, fast, and filled with people who didn't care about film reviews. They wanted glitz, chaos, and something to talk about at the bar. Jayne knew she could deliver all of that, and more. She signed a Vegas residency and became one of the first mainstream actresses to headline her own show on the Strip. That move wasn't common at the time. Big stars didn't usually work that scene unless their film careers were fading. But Jayne didn't treat it like a fallback. She treated it like a full takeover. Her name went up in lights, and people lined up for tickets before they even knew what kind of show they were about to watch. The act was a mix of everything Jayne knew how to do. She sang, she told jokes, she flirted with the front row and tossed out double entendres like they were candy. Some nights, the whole thing felt more like a party than a performance. She leaned into the chaos and made it part of the charm. The audiences weren't made up of critics or producers. These were regular people who had seen her face in magazines and wanted to see the real thing in person. She made $25,000 a week doing it, and she earned every bit of it. She wasn't just standing there smiling. She was holding court. Fans who came expecting the pinup girl left talking about how funny and sharp she was. The show didn't rely on fancy sets or big casts. It relied on Jayne being Jayne, loud, unpredictable, and completely in control. She also didn't stick to a standard paycheck model. If a club couldn't pay the full rate, she'd accept payment in other ways. Some nights, she walked away with fur coats or jewelry. Other times, she got furniture, silverware, or even live animals. It didn't matter what the item was. If it had value and could help her maintain her lifestyle, it went into the deal. She treated Vegas like a personal marketplace where charm and negotiation worked better than contracts. Her mansion in Los Angeles, the Pink Palace, was filled with the results of these deals. Chandeliers from club owners, custom art from fans, and even a few odd gifts like monkeys or exotic birds. It all became part of the image. Visitors never walked into a quiet home. They walked into a spectacle where every object had a story tied to a performance or an appearance. Jayne didn't collect things. She collected moments. Even though the major studios weren't calling, her name stayed in rotation. She was still showing up in newspapers, still doing interviews, still grabbing headlines, but now it wasn't tied to a movie release or a press tour. It was tied to the fact that she was out there, night after night, doing what stars were supposed to do, captivate a crowd. What made her Vegas run stand out was how personal it felt. There was no script she had to follow, no director shaping her performance, no studio executive making edits. She could say what she wanted, wear what she wanted, and design the show around her own energy. If the audience roared at a joke, she'd add 3 more. If someone shouted something from the back, she turned it into part of the act. The show lived and changed in real time. For Jayne, Vegas wasn't just work, it was freedom. She had control over her time, her image, and her money. She wasn't chasing auditions or hoping for approval. She was building something on her own. She made space for herself where the system had shut the door, and she filled it with laughter, color, and spectacle. The crowds kept coming. Some were tourists. Others were die-hard fans who had followed her since the early days. But they all came for the same reason. They wanted to see the woman who made Hollywood nervous. The one who could crash a party just by walking in. The one who didn't need a script to be interesting. Vegas gave her a platform that didn't rely on anyone else's approval. And with that kind of control, she started thinking bigger. The first nude scene in Hollywood history. By 1963, she had dominated newspapers, stolen scenes on stage, and filled showrooms in Vegas. But none of it had changed how the film industry saw her. She wanted to be taken seriously again. And when nothing else worked, she took a gamble that no American actress had taken before. She signed on to star in a film called Promises, Promises, a small-budget comedy that wouldn't have made a ripple, except for one detail. Jayne agreed to appear fully nude. It was the first time an American actress had done that in a mainstream sound-era film. This wasn't a blink-and-miss moment. It was bold, direct, and filmed with the full intent to grab national attention. The reaction came fast. Theaters in some cities refused to show the film. Local officials called it immoral. Religious groups protested outside cinemas. Some newspapers wouldn't even print the movie's name. But tickets still sold. In the places where it played, people lined up to see it. The buzz was massive. Photos from the set leaked out. Reporters wrote breathless reviews that focused more on her body than the actual movie. Once again, Jayne had pulled off the impossible. She made the entire country talk about her all at once. But the attention didn't fix anything. She had hoped that doing something historic would open new doors. She thought the risk would show producers that she was fearless and serious about performing. Instead, they turned away. The industry didn't give her credit for the boundary she had just broken. They labeled her as a publicity chaser. They treated the film as a stunt, not as a turning point. And while Promises made money, it didn't get her better roles. It didn't even get her more roles. Critics dismissed the film quickly. They said it relied too much on shock. They didn't talk about her timing or delivery or presence on screen. They wrote it off as a headline generator. Jayne didn't get to defend it on major platforms. The serious interviews didn't come. The talk shows didn't follow. What she thought would reboot her career ended up confirming what the studios already believed, that she wasn't what they were looking for anymore. Even fans had mixed feelings. Some came to see the film just for the nudity, but didn't care about the story. Others were disappointed because they wanted to see her return in a strong role, not just a risky one. Jayne was caught in the middle. She had made a bold move, but it left her in the same position outside the system looking in. The film didn't tank her completely. Her name still meant something in tabloids and in Vegas, but it didn't carry weight in casting rooms. Serious directors stayed quiet. Studios moved on to other actresses. And even though Jayne had done something no one else had dared to do, she was stuck. She didn't hide. She didn't slow down, but she understood that the old path was no longer open. The offers weren't going to improve. The industry wasn't going to rewrite its rules for her. She had to come up with something new, something that didn't rely on scripts or producers, something that she could control from the ground up. That's when she started thinking about television. Not guest appearances or variety shows, but something that belonged to her. A sitcom that knew too much. So, in 1965, she pitched something no one saw coming. A sitcom. Not just any sitcom, though. This was a sharp, self-aware show called The Jayne Mansfield Show, and the concept hit uncomfortably close to home. The lead character? A blonde bombshell stuck in her own cartoonish image, trying to convince the world she could play Shakespeare. It was bold, ironic, and miles ahead of anything airing at the time. Jayne wanted to flip the script literally. She wasn't interested in another silly comedy about housewives or dating. This was her life turned into television. A woman trapped by her looks, craving real work, being underestimated by everyone around her. The pitch was smart, and she was ready to make fun of the very image that made her famous. She wasn't asking for sympathy, she was asking for a camera and a chance to show the world what she really saw from inside the bubble. But the networks didn't bite. They didn't even hesitate. They flat out said no. The idea was too uncomfortable, too revealing. Producers weren't ready for a show that peeled the mask off stardom. It was one thing to play a ditzy blonde. It was another thing entirely to show what happened after the cameras stopped rolling. The pitch was too real. It forced people to think about what showbiz actually did to women like Jayne. There was also the fear of timing. In the mid-60s, TV was still built on perfect families, safe jokes, and glamorous illusions. Jayne's sitcom threatened to mess with all of that. It would have made the audience laugh, but also squirm. It would have looked at fame through the eyes of someone who had it, lost it, and still had to smile on cue. That kind of honesty didn't have a place on the schedule back then. After the rejection, Jayne didn't make a scene. She didn't attack the networks or start a public feud. She just kept working. She went back to smaller theaters, local productions, and anywhere that would give her stage time. She never stopped performing. Even when the venues were smaller or the scripts were forgettable, she still showed up ready. The dream hadn't died. It had just taken a different shape. But something had shifted. Jayne had seen how the industry reacted when she showed them her real self. She had offered something smart, layered, and personal. They wanted the version of her that fit into the old mold. Not the woman writing her own story, not the actress who could look in the mirror and turn the reflection into a script. With fewer big offers coming in, Jayne's work started to spread out. A Vegas appearance here, a regional play there. She was still in demand, but the rhythm was different. It was patchy, less predictable. Sometimes the shows paid well, other times they barely covered the cost of travel. But she said yes to most of it because staying visible still mattered. She couldn't afford to disappear. During this time, her personal life also became harder to manage. The same woman who once turned every photo op into a headline was starting to show signs of exhaustion. She still smiled for the press. She still wore pink. But there was a quietness in how she moved through the world. The spotlight was dimming, and she could feel it. The show she had pitched, about a woman trapped in her own image, wasn't just a clever idea. It was her life in real time. Even though the show never made it to air, the pitch itself said everything. Jayne Mansfield understood exactly what was happening to her career, her reputation, and her future. And she tried to say something about it before the silence got too loud. Turmoil offstage and the last tour. Jayne Mansfield had always known how to perform, but by the mid-60s, the performances offstage were starting to feel heavier than the ones under the lights. After her third divorce, she began a relationship with her divorce attorney, Sam Brody. It wasn't quiet, it wasn't stable, and it definitely wasn't private. The tabloids followed them constantly. The headlines weren't about her career anymore. They were about arguments, sightings, and rumors. The public still wanted to see Jayne, but not in the way she had once hoped. Behind the glam and forced smiles, she was tired. She kept working, but the pace was no longer exciting. It was exhausting. She was still booking nightclub appearances and traveling from city to city, but it wasn't the same kind of fame. These weren't movie premieres or grand stage performances. These were hotel lounges, small theaters, and late-night gigs where the crowd was more curious than loyal. The money helped, but it didn't refill the tank. She was moving constantly but feeling stuck. The offers she was getting weren't insulting. They were just thin. She'd perform in places where her name used to draw massive crowds, but now it barely filled the front rows. The audiences were still clapping, but the energy had changed. The spotlight was dimmer. It didn't follow her automatically anymore. She had to chase it, and she did. She never stopped performing, even when it felt like no one was really listening. The strain showed in small ways. Her once meticulously crafted image was harder to maintain. The pink outfits, the rehearsed smiles, the polished responses, they were still there, but they took more effort. People noticed the cracks. Her team noticed the mood swings. She had built a career out of turning herself into a spectacle, but she was starting to feel like the show wouldn't end. No matter how tired she was, the act had to go on. Jayne and Brody's relationship added more noise. They traveled together often, sometimes with her children in tow. The tabloids loved catching them in public, arguing, posing, or ignoring each other entirely. The drama sold papers, but it wore her down. She was trying to stay visible, but the reason she was in the news felt harder to control. She couldn't steer the narrative the way she used to. Every headline felt a little more detached from the woman she really was. Still, she kept saying yes to shows. She needed the work, and more than that, she needed the audience. Even when the applause didn't feel as loud, it still meant someone was paying attention. She would step onto a stage in a small-town club and smile like it was the Oscars. That part never changed. Jayne always showed up, even when she was barely sleeping, even when the paychecks were late, even when the crowd only knew her from magazine stories, not movie credits. The road gigs were endless. She would jump from one city to the next, performing quick sets, shaking hands, posing for photos, and getting back in the car before sunrise. It was a loop that didn't slow down. Some nights were better than others. Some nights she laughed for real, but most nights she was acting. Not the kind of acting she trained for, but the kind you do when everything feels heavy, and you still have to go on stage in heels. People around her noticed she wasn't the same. Close friends said she looked thinner, quieter, more distracted. She would talk about big plans like new TV deals or future projects, but those conversations started happening less often. She was tired of being misunderstood, tired of pushing for projects no one wanted to fund, tired of trying to convince the world she had more to offer than curves and controversy. But even at her lowest, she didn't stop working. Jayne had built a life where silence felt dangerous. If she stopped moving, she'd be forgotten. That fear kept her going, even when her health was slipping and her schedule was unforgiving. She took every booking, posed for every fan, and held her head high at every event. She never let anyone see her fall apart, even when she probably wanted to. In June 1967, she was back on the road again. Another tour stop, another late-night show, another crowded car ride to another town. The spotlight hadn't gone out, it was just getting harder to reach. And this time, it wouldn't wait. The crash, the rumors, and the legacy. The last booking on Jayne Mansfield's June 1967 tour wrapped after midnight in Biloxi, Mississippi. She, her boyfriend Sam Brody, driver Ronnie Harrison, and 3 of her children, Mickey Jr., Zoltan, and little Mariska, climbed into a 1966 Buick Electra for the 2-hour ride to New Orleans. U.S. Highway 90 was dark and humid, and a mosquito-fogging truck drifted ahead of them, shrouded in thick pesticide mist that hid its slow speed and its trailer's edge. Harrison never saw the rig in time. At about 2:25 a.m. on June 29th, the Electra slammed under the truck's rear. Its roof sheared back in an instant. Harrison, Brody, and Mansfield died where they sat. The three children, sleeping in the back seat, survived with cuts and bruises. Morning radio lit up with speculation before police confirmed a single fact. A cruel rumor spread that Mansfield had been decapitated. Reporters repeated it so often that many still believe it today. Official autopsy records state blunt force trauma as the cause of death, and note that her skull remained intact. Another story blamed a supernatural curse from Church of Satan founder Anton LaVey, a claim with no evidence beyond tabloid whispers. The truth was simpler and more tragic. A commercial trailer without a protective guard, a cloud of fogging spray, and a driver who could not brake in time. Photographs of the wreck, snapped by first responders, shocked the public into action. Within months, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration began studying underride crashes. In 1968, the agency mandated steel bars across the lower rear ends of trailers to stop cars from sliding underneath. Transport workers started calling the device the Mansfield bar. Every long-haul truck in North America now drags that silent memorial down the highway. A hard piece of steel that keeps other families from suffering the same fate. Back in Los Angeles, funeral plans ran side by side with relentless gossip. Life insurance companies stalled over contract language. Studio executives issued brief statements of sympathy, though few had offered her work in years. Fans left pink roses at the gates of her Sunset Mansion, still known as the Pink Palace. Reporters lingered, hoping to glimpse the surviving children. The youngest, Mariska Hargitay, carried a scar on her head for the rest of her life, a reminder of a night she could never remember. She later followed her mother onto the screen and built her own fame through decades on network television. Collectors moved quickly. The smashed Buick was sold to a carnival operator who parked it under a banner that read, "See the death car of Hollywood's Golden Girl." Thousands paid to stare at crumpled chrome and faded seat cushions. Police eventually intervened and ordered the exhibit closed, but the car resurfaced over the years like a ghostly attraction on wheels. Each appearance reignited the rumor mill, forcing family members to correct the same myths again and again. Estate lawyers sorted through Mansfield's finances and found the expected mix of assets and debts. The Pink Palace, stuffed with furniture she had accepted instead of cash, was eventually sold. Some pieces landed in private collections, others vanished after estate sales. One chandelier turned up years later in a Las Vegas pawn shop, still labeled property of Jayne. Fans bought pink bathroom tiles, monogrammed napkins, even a mailbox shaped like a heart. Every item felt like a souvenir from a story that never quite fit on film. Industry insiders spent months debating her legacy. Was she a cautionary tale or an innovator? The answer depended on who you asked. Publicists copied her headline-grabbing tactics for future clients. Marketers studied her color branding and applied it to pop stars and soft drink campaigns. Reality TV producers later pointed to her life as proof that personal chaos, when packaged right, could power an entire industry. Social media influencers decades away would unknowingly follow a blueprint she drew in lipstick and flashbulbs. Film historians traced modern publicity stunts back to her poolside bikini snap and her strategically torn gowns. Academics wrote papers on her ability to control her narrative years before terms like personal brand entered business textbooks. Young actors watched old interview clips and saw a performer who refused to wait for permission, filling silence with charm until someone pressed record. The Mansfield bar saves lives on highways every day, yet her biggest cultural imprint lives on-screen and online through people who never met her. Mariska Hargitay's long television career keeps her mother's name rolling in closing credits. Fashion houses still release bubblegum pink collections that critics link to Jayne's signature shade. Music videos, red carpet moments, and viral selfies often echo poses she invented on sound stages built before color film became standard. Jayne Mansfield's story ends on a Louisiana highway, but the methods she forged continued to spread long after the wreckage was cleared. Anyone who courts controversy for attention. Anyone who builds a personal logo out of a single color. Anyone who turns an everyday moment into a headline stands on ground she broke first and paid for dearly. The face on the posters faded, yet the playbook stayed in print. Every pop culture flash you scroll past owes a spark to Jayne Mansfield, the woman who used scandal as strategy and carved safety into steel. Hit subscribe, drop a comment on your favorite Mansfield moment, and keep an eye on the next headline queen. Chances are she's reading from Jayne's script.